Hi, my name's Chris Gunter, and this is my video presentation for the media of politics and leading towards the term paper. And this may be a rather long presentation, so I'm going to just pretty much stick to the script. Uh, so for this, I say the basic approach I'm taking is that I have a core idea I want to pursue, and then on top of that, I have at this point a few other possible angles I might incorporate. Um, Then for this presentation, in terms of the structure, the idea is to first present my core idea before then touching upon some of these other possible angles. After that, I'll go into a bit more detail concerning the core idea and the possible further angles and how they interact, by way of going over the gist of my research thus far, with recourse to some visual aids, by way of including a selection of marked up photos and screenshots that I've been gathering as part of kind of my normal way of researching and thinking. Um, yeah, this is a big part of my journal thinking process, for good and for ill. I tend to gather all sorts of thoughts and possibilities, and so I have no shortage of material and inspiration and dots to connect. The problem, though, is that I end up with far too much material, and even after eliminating a lot of it, I still tend to end up too broad and not deep enough in my analysis. So that leads me into touching upon what will be the final part of my presentation, which is some thoughts about moving forward. Things to keep in mind moving forward. So why why does the advance? Okay, that was a small glitch, so I'll keep that in. The screen clearly wasn't advancing. The core idea. So using as anchor examples, on the one hand, Donald Trump's blatant remolding of truth and reality, and the perpetuation of such in the right-wing slash fascist ecosystem, media ecosystem. And on the other hand, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's arguably death melding of policy and politics. I would like to explore a couple things, but first more detail about each of those first subpoints. Um, Regarding Donald Trump and the kind of right-wing ecosystem, media ecosystem. Recently in the news, there's been stuff about the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, saying that the algae was caused by vandals, these things that seem just outlandish on their face. Similarly, things about attendance at this 2026 Great American State Fair, sort of just blatant unreality, non-truths, which are then repeated perhaps until the point that they contest anyways for fact. And then regarding Mamdani, this idea of politics and policy, or policy and politics, and how they're kind of two sides of a coin. And the left, I'm kind of going a bit off script now for a second. The left has, I think, focuses too much on policy and not enough on the politics of the situation. So Mamdani stressing fiscal stewardship of New York City, of the city that he is charged with, is something that is policy. It's also politics, but it's policy. Um, while something like leaning into the recent New York Knicks championship run, sports prioritizing or valorizing sports, for example, is something that the left often shies away from. But it's good politics. A lot of people like sports. And when you don't, anyways, I won't go off on that. Maybe in the essay. So using these anchor examples, I would like to explore the present post-truth, so-called post-truth, media and political landscape. I've kind of talked about this stuff, how the left has had a problem maybe with dealing with this. And then the idea specifically that regarding sort of non-fact or post-truth, that I think I would argue that non-fact cannot be countered with mere fact and reason. It must be countered with equally grand and spectacular narratives operating as a countervailing force, which just happen to be true to the best approximation of truth. Cursory or a brief outline of possible additional angles. So this is just to get at what will come next when I'll go through some of the research process, but this gives a sense of what maybe to focus on, what I'll try to focus on. So from its being discussed in an essay and a short collection I came across, I want to incorporate perhaps some elements from 20th century French playwright Jean Genet's The Balcony, using it to deal with the intersection of the false or the fabulist on the one hand, and on the other hand, the absurd or the surreal. And then from an article I stumbled across and looking up something else, I want to frame the above mentioned incorporation of Genet with brief reference, or I would like to possibly, right, with brief reference, perhaps kind of a framing reference to an article discussing per its title, Post-Truth Dystopia, Huxleyan Distraction, or Orwellian Control. The idea would probably be that Genet's The Balcony points to another possibility beyond the Huxleyan distraction or Orwellian control, which would be that of absurdist confabulation, mixing elements of distraction and control by via or producing sort of a mesmerizing fabulist surreality, as I've put it in my thinking this through. Finally, the other possible angle I'm thinking of incorporating involves notions of conjuncture and articulation, with reference to the work of Stuart Hall, who I'm not super familiar with, and whose work on conjunction and articulation I'm not at all familiar with. And then Antonio Gramsci comes in there when you're talking about conjuncture. That's where I know the idea from having studied his work a little bit in a previous course. Here I incorporate a book I came across concerning post-truth and conjuncture. And I probably mobilized as part of the discussion towards the idea that the politics and circus of fabulist surreality monopolizes the conjuncture or the historical moment. And it is up to the opponent of this fabulist and post-truth surreality to meet circus with circus, so to speak, i.e. to likewise seek to mobilize attention, all the while seeking to ensure that behind the scenes, the bread part of the equation, i.e. the policy, is being pursued. So that beyond the particular moment, let's think of this as like the micro conjuncture for now, the broader moment, or the macro conjuncture for now, is being dealt with, and people's needs are being met as best as possible, which is good politics of a slightly different sort than that which I'm equating with circus, and in the somewhat longer term. So the research process so far, starting with YouTubers. So to briefly explore my core idea about post-truth, Trump, Mamdani, bread and circuses, and possible further angles about Genet's The Balcony, Huxleyan distraction and Orwellian control, and The Balcony perhaps representing another possibility, that of fabulist surreality, then about conjuncture and articulation, just to reiterate those subpoints, or possible further lines of inquiry, and how they interact by way of going over the gist of my research process thus far. I will, yes, start talking about briefly some of the initial ideas. I realize I'm going back over the screenshots I take and make, or photo screenshots sort of I'd take, and then make little notes to myself so that they mean something to me. That a lot of my thinking actually started here, and I'll have to cite some of these people if I use this stuff. Also, I wanted to note that, so I watch a lot of sort of center left to near far left YouTubers as part of my daily routine. Yeah, so a lot of my thoughts to come from here. But if I'm just repeating myself. If I end up using this stuff, some of it I'd have to find more authoritative evidences. So on this page, we've got leads regarding persuasion versus procedure. I've got Mamdani talking in part about the Knicks. Up here in the corner, I've got a reference to Quinn Slobodian, who I earlier thought I might want to include, talking about household jokes and what I would call surreality as being stress tests of, I suppose, trying to push the Overton window, see how far you can push it. I've got Chris Hayes telling Zoran Mamdani that he's not only charming, but ruthless for backing primary challenges against sitting Democrats, which I would assert is something of the a sort of counter politics that the left needs to pursue. And then I've got content here about Trump's and the conservative slash fascist media ecosystem's farcical claims regarding the Washington Memorial Pool, the National State Attendance, National State Fair Attendance, which I mentioned. Trump is a liar, but he's authentically himself is a quote I've got down here, which I think there's something there. Reference to an idea of substance, of style now triumphing over substance. Um, and a specific mention of in regards to New York City policy regarding rent stabilization about politics and policy. That's initially where at least where that notion kind of concretized for me. And then for the research process, starting with Amazon, I'll be going through this part pretty quickly. For starting with Amazon searches, I found this trio series from the University of Chicago Press, which was not at all familiar with. From here, Sovereignty Incorporated, three inquiries or inquiries, if you prefer, into in politics and enjoyment from 2010. This one, I've got here so a quote from a line from the blurb is the current political moment, or so this conjuncture, the current political moment turns out to not so much be exceptional as exceptionally revealing of the constitutive tension between enjoyment and economy. And a line from the review there, a dazzling new reading of Genet's The Balcony, led me to look into that, which we'll get to in 1 second. And the book is that provides a panoply of conceptual tools to think about the absurdity of the present. So, without having read, that's how this kind of research stage works. I guess without having read any of this stuff, I'm going, okay, I think there's connections here, maybe. And similarly, searching post-truth, having decided, I think I want to talk about post-truth. A Short History of Truth by Julian Baggini, I believe is a philosopher. I had to look that up. Included here, this is something that is sort of lower on the radar, but he has this typology of truths, and that might be interesting. Could be useful for thinking about kind of what we conceive of as being truth, as in it just means fact, versus how types of truth can commingle in this post-truth environment. Then post-truth and the mediation of reality, new conjunctures. That's kind of where I thought, oh yeah, conjuncture is an idea that I want to explore more. And so what could happen here. And I guess I will just, and then in searching, or no, I suppose it was just in the blurb here, I saw a reference to Hall's understanding of conjuncture and articulation, and I've heard articulation mentioned as a concept in cultural studies that I don't quite know what is really meant by that. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize that Stuart Hall talked about conjuncture. So I looked that up, and that leads me down to some possibilities there. And I gave myself a little sort of placeholder. I think of it as like a placeholder search reminder. Mamdani Masters, I seen a clip recently of him referring to I guess it's sort of the famous Gramsci line about this being between the old is the new is not yet born, or what is this now? The old is dying and the new is yet to be born. And in the interregnum, there are monsters, something to that effect. Which then I've since seen, looking things up a little bit, that line has been thrown around a lot recently. So I might want to look into that. And then for Omni searches, quickly, just basically, again, looking up things, post-truth, conjuncture, search hall, coming across a possible journal article, which would be a good background to hegemony if I was going to go down that route. But I think in the end, as I've been working through this, I probably won't really focus in on that. And similarly here too, another one by Melissa Gregg, who I recognize her from working on affect a little bit or a lot. I recognize her name a little from her work on affect a lot. So if I do want to, this could be good background, but it'd just be taking a quick look at it probably. This is the more fruitful lead from my journal searches, where just from happenstance searching one thing to another, and I come across a result that I wasn't really looking for, and it's the one about how Huxley and Distraction and Orwellian Control, which I thought, again, could be a useful framing device to then go off onto the idea using Genet. But this all might be too much for one short paper. And I have a bunch of stuff from the library, mostly interlibrary loan requests, just so I have stuff at hand that most of it I probably won't use, but that's what I tend to do when I'm preparing to write papers. And now I'm trying to lean more towards the interlibrary loan as opposed to buying books, spending the money on that. I did buy one book though, which is Hyperpolitics. Just from looking through the syllabus early on, I thought that looks interesting, and then I looked up the book a bit more. I thought that looks really interesting, and I picked it up. And there's a bit here, as I've got no script, I don't know where I am anymore. There's a bit here about that seemed particularly useful for this essay, which is Jager's reference to Peter Sloterdijk's conception in a book called In English, in the same boat, of polity, quote, as denoting the general structure and composition of a political community on page 15. And then on page 39, Jager mentioning, quote, two dimensions of the political, politics and policy, and then in brackets, the notion of polity invoked by Sloterdijk, here completes the triad. So there's something maybe here to be pursued surrounding how questions of the interrelationship between politics and policy, aforementioned, must always be considered in relation to the polity within which they operate. And here, polity may be related to space as conjuncture is related to time. I was thinking as I was making my notes for this presentation. So, other course material to be incorporated. I'm sure things will come up as the course continues, whether through marginal notes I make in the readings, which sometimes spark parts of essays, or connections being made while producing the detailed study notes. I'll kind of make in my own little shorthand, little asides about things that could relate to the essay. So going forward, these are things I'm going to try to keep in mind going forward. Starting to actually write soon. So I'm sure I have enough right here to write a decent 2,000-word essay. What I'm finding is tending to happen with my essay writing, though, is that around this point, the actual essay due date is a little ways off. And so I just kind of keep semi-actively researching. And the litany of possible avenues to incorporate just keeps growing. And so it's actually not productive. If anything, it's detrimental to the process to just continue to research when you already have enough to say. Not that you won't find more stuff, but to just start actually writing. So as I do so, or intend to do so, and we'll see how that goes, I need to keep in mind an interplay of seeking and finding a reasonable essay length. I should just start writing soon. And in doing so, and in discussion with you at some point, I should try to find a reasonable length for the essay and then stick to that. So in the essay specs, it's stated that 1,500 to 2,000 words is a suggestion. I may want to pick a target of something a little bit roomier, maybe 2,500 words or even 3,000 words, but whatever it is, then stick to that. And in doing so, I'll need to make tough decisions about breadth versus depth. Regardless of what length I aim for, I need to work on finding that balance. As I see it, this can be achieved through combination of two approaches. One is to work on better distinguishing between, on the one hand, what can be determined to be non-core, but still useful in mentioning and passing, such as, for example, maybe that brief framing regarding from Huxley and Orwell, versus what is core and needs to be dealt with in depth. So if I'm going over a whole bunch of things and none of them in depth, then it produces an essay that is too shallow. But there might be some things that I can still mention in passing as long as I'm making sure that some stuff is being gone into in depth. But then the other way to achieve this is for some of that stuff to just dismiss it entirely, or from creative writing, as they say, to kill your darlings. Cut out the ideas I really like, cut out some ideas I really like, but which don't quite serve the essay's purpose as well as certain other ideas. And yes, in conclusion, just basically the wrap-up key ideas, rapid fire. So truth, post-truth, Donald Trump, Zoran Ramdani, bread and circuses. maybe this conjuncture and its articulations. What does that even mean, though? And within this polity, which is maybe another way of saying dealing with the present mediatized political landscape, which is the subject of this course. In any case, policy versus politics, or policy and politics, within a conjuncture which might be characterized as being a mesmerizing fabulous surreality. Part distraction, part control. Parent nonsense is perhaps really just deft sleight of hand. And how might that be countered? So that is my presentation. Thank you for your time. And I guess that's it.